I could tell you that I'm interested in the Constitution because it guarantees my rights as a U.S. citizen, or because it protects said rights. But to be honest, having grown up without any run-ins with the law, the content of the Constitution is an afterthought. What excites me is the ability to interpret the Constitution through any lens one heart desires. That being said, the Constitution is not some harmless piece of literature. Different interpretations create different understandings of the law. So what I would like to know is how things like author intent and age come into play when looking at this historic document.
I think it's a great mistake to see the founders as godlike characters. They were human beings. There isn't one of them that didn't have his failings or faults, some of them grievous failings and faults. And they were inconsistent. To say that they were all devout Christians, for example, is not true. Now, some were very devout, some were middle devout, some were hardly devout, and some were agnostics, and they were human beings, and they had ideas.
The clause I chose comes from Article 1, Section 4. The Congress shall assemble at least once in every year, and such meeting shall be on the first Monday in December, unless they shall by law appoint a different day. I have chosen this clause to address part of the Constitution that is clearly outdated. However, it illustrates a point. The Founding Fathers lived and breathed a reality much different from the one we have today. In an article entitled 18th Century Transportation, Rick Brainerd paints a picture of what getting around meant for those living in the 1700s. In the 18th century, transportation was primitive by today's standards. The majority of the time, if you wanted to go anywhere, you either walked or rode a horse on trails or rough roads. This clause is obviously ridiculous today due to advances in technology, and demonstrates how in the light of the modern world, the Constitution can be outdated at times. It might be beneficial to step back and try to examine what was going through the minds of the Founding Fathers as they wrote the Constitution by seeing what influences similar modern documents. In 1991, when the Czechs and Slavs adopted a new Bill of Rights, they were in a similar boat as the Founding Fathers. According to Dick Howard in an article entitled Drafting Constitutions for New Democracies, neither the Eastern Europeans nor the Founding Fathers had real precedent to create such powerful documents. In an article entitled Constitution of the United States of America, it is stated, "The oldest written national constitution in use, the Constitution, defines the principal organs of government and their jurisdictions, and the basic rights of citizens. It was an extraordinary feat of cooperation to create an incredibly new document like the one we have today, which we often take for granted." There are four main ways of interpreting the Constitution from a literary standpoint. First, there's originalism. Originalists think that the very best way to interpret the Constitution is to determine how the framers intended the Constitution to be interpreted. They look to several sources to determine this intent, including the contemporary writings of the framers, newspaper articles, the Federalist Papers, and notes from the Constitutional Convention itself. Another viewpoint is modernism. Modernists contend that the Constitution is deliberately vague in many areas, expressly to permit modern interpretations to override older ones as the Constitution ages. It is this interpretation that best embodies the living Constitution concept. The Constitution is a flexible and dynamic, changing slowly over time as the morals and beliefs of the population shift. The next lens is literalism. The only thing one needs to interpret the Constitution is a literal reading of the words contained therein, with an expert knowledge of the 18th century meaning of those words. The debates leading to the final draft are not relevant. The Federalist Papers are not relevant. Only the words. Finally, there is democratic reinforcement. Democratic proponents advocate that the Constitution is not designed to be a set of specific principles and guidelines, but that it was designed to be a general principle, a basic skeleton on which contemporary vision would be built.
I'm a judge in the Phoenix Municipal Court.
And what's your relationship with the U.S. Constitution as a municipal judge?
Well, I deal with the Constitution every day, and primarily for the cases that I hear, I'm dealing with unreasonable stops and seizures by the police department. So I have to be an arbiter of what is fair and what is constitutionally. It protects the citizens, their constitutional right to privacy and their right against unreasonable searches and seizures. And then I also have to balance whether or not the police officers, it's primarily police officers, or law enforcement, are adhering to the guidelines. No, I see it as a very fluid document because you can tell from before September 11th, before the terrorist attacks, I think it was interpreted more rigidly than it was after the attacks. I mean, I think that some of the administrations after September 11th have tried to find holes in the Constitution to fit the situation at hand, and I don't think that that's worked entirely. So no, I think it's a very fluid document, and it's changing all the time, and one of the ways it's changing is the way that the United States Supreme Court interprets the Constitution. After all these years, I think it's the best system in the entire world, because our system of government is the envy of so many countries. I mean, they're willing to give their lives, their families, their property, everything, just to have a say in the government. And so I think when it comes to the certain minutia of the Constitution, which is what, not necessarily minutia, but it says it has to meet on a certain date, that can be interpreted in many different ways and updated for the well, I mean, it was a pretty spectacular group, a really bright group, and all from divergent backgrounds, and how they could come to a consensus on this is really remarkable, and that it would still hold sway today is very remarkable. Well, there's hopefully, I don't have biases.
Okay.
But there's a jury, there's a whole jury instruction that says, I have not intended by anything I have said or done to suggest what you should find to be the facts in the case, or that I believe or disbelieve any witness, or that I believe the defendant to be guilty or not guilty. If anything I have said or done has seemed to so indicate, you must disregard it and form your own opinion. So there's an actual jury instruction that tells them not to regard, if they saw me, for example, roll my eyes or fall asleep or something, it has absolutely no reflection on the
My name
case.
is Don Carlson. I'm the owner of a small forklift repair and servicing company called Reliable Forklift Sales here in Phoenix, Arizona. That's a good question. I would say that it's probably a bit outdated, and that it was done for some reason, maybe as far as businesses back in the 1700s. I believe it's probably more through the Founding Fathers' intent. I don't think it's necessarily a letter of the law, but from what I understand is in the Constitution, it should be pretty much what the Founding Fathers intended it to be. I view them as inspired men from divine inspiration that were put together at a time of great, tumult in the country, and came together and had a lot of ideas and a synergy of ideas of very bright men.
I now know that the Constitution has great staying power because of its vagueness and intention. The differences of opinions do not create schisms, but connections that in turn lead to a strong and diverse U.S. government. Oh, and it would be nice if Congress assembled more than once each year.
so some people may think that the Constitution is too lenient, but I find it really updates as time goes by, and that will be around for another 250 years or so.